November 12th, and I am speaking to you from my home in Washington, D.C. As I always do, I want to begin just by acknowledging I'm on the land of the Piscataway. And I want to thank the Piscataway. They are the indigenous nation to these lands. And I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. This morning, I wanted to talk briefly about the executions that are going on within our country. There was been two executions this past week. We had Brandon Bernard, who was executed on, I think it was on Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday, and then Alfred Bourgeau, who was executed last night. And that, I think, concludes the execution scheduled for 2020, but President Trump has scheduled some more before he leaves office in 2021, in the early part of January. And if he does, with these other executions go through, not only will he become our most executing president in the past 100 years, but he has already broken the record that has stood for 130 years of lame duck presidents not conducting executions after the election. And so this has been brought to a lot of places. There's been a lot of protests and a lot of things being said about this. And I do not mean to say any of this to diminish the horribleness of the crimes that these people have committed. Both Brandon Bernard and Alfred Bourgeau, there's not much dispute. They were guilty, and the crimes that they were accused of or convicted of were horrible, and they did deserve to be punished. But what is being protested right now is the use of the death penalty. And as I've been sitting trying to wrap my head around this, and even this morning as I started drinking my second cup of coffee, I was just trying to understand, what's going on in our nation and why are we doing this? And I was even reading some of the articles regarding the execution of Brandon Bernard. And I posted some things about his execution on my Facebook page, and there began to be a clearly pretty loud debate, or I don't even call it a debate, but just a statement of a series of statements, especially by one person in particular, who was arguing that this is the role of the Christian nation. And there's so many problems with that thought just in general. Even if you understand the teachings of Jesus, the idea of a Christendom, a Christian nation, is heretical. It's not even close to what he was advocating for. But then to somehow to justify capital punishment through examples taken from the Old Testament, again, the theological leaps you have to make in understanding even your own identity, or misunderstanding and appropriating what your identity is mind-boggling. But regardless of that's really what's going on. Is, again, the thought of our nation doing these things is rooted in this heresy of Christendom, and that somehow we are justified. And this is the way that Western Christianity gets past a lot of deep moral issues, is they find examples in the Old Testament where the God of Israel ordered or commanded his people to do something, and then they appropriate that space, and they say, now we are God's chosen people, and we are his manifestation here on earth, and we have these same commands, and this is how manifest destiny gets claimed, and this is also how capital punishment is justified. And it's a theological heresy. It's a misappropriation and misunderstanding of even the role of the church or the teachings of Jesus. But this is what we have as a nation right now. So as I was thinking about it through that lens and through that understanding, again, as I try to do, I did this throughout my campaign, I do this through a lot of my teaching, is I tried to think about our history and what other nations that we stand in solidarity with regarding the death penalty. And I did a search, and I found an article on BBC of what nations still allow the death penalty. And we are in the top 10 of the most executing nations in the world. And this is not even including the people we execute on the field, right? This does not include the execution of George Floyd and other things that we've done in our country. This is just the judgments of execution that are not played out on the streets of our country. And that top 10 is China, and then Iran, followed by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, the United States, Pakistan, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. This is the company we keep regarding legal executions by our government. Not quite the group of nations that we like to fancy ourselves to share values with or to be a part of, but this is who we keep company with regarding our practice of legalized executions in our nation. And when you look at a lot of these nations, many of them have horrible records, and not only histories, but even current realities on human rights and civil rights and things like that. When you look at China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, again, Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen, these are not the nations we look for as beacons of civil rights or human rights. And so again, it's not surprising that the United States is in the midst of this list, because though we promote ourselves to be a beacon of human rights and civil rights, we're not, right? We are deeply, deeply systemically white supremacist, racist, and sexist to this day. And so maybe this list is a good reflection that this is the company that we keep. But the thing I was really struck by and that I was reflecting on this morning is, again, when you look at our history of genocide, and the fact that we still celebrate many of our nation's most white supremacist and genocidal presidents, and we call them our greatest leaders, particularly Abraham Lincoln, and as well as others, and Thomas Jefferson. All of these people were deeply not only slave owners, but white supremacists, blatant white supremacists. And we celebrate them as our heroes. And we have never even dealt with the history of genocide that we've committed as a nation. And so, like these nations that we're on this list with, that still are openly violating human rights, as are we, it's not surprising that we are on a list of the top 10 most executing countries, with nations like China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. This is the company that we keep. And one of the things I've been struggling with is because I have a lot of friends who are very active politically, and there are many who are even out in DC today protesting and are at the execution site. I think it's in Indiana, and they're protesting, and they're trying to raise a lot of awareness about this and talk about this. And while I am deeply grieved by what we're doing, and while I believe what's happening is unjust, I have not yet felt motivated to protest regarding this. And I think it's because I believe we're protesting the wrong thing. Right? As we do so much in all of our nation's history, we protest the symptoms instead of treating the sickness and treating the root of the problem. And yes, the symptom is that we are executing prisoners now at the highest rate that we've executed them in 130 years, or 100 years. But that's not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is our racist, white supremacist foundation and our history of enslavement and genocide that we've never dealt with. And so until we can, again, as I talk about so many times, create common memory, until we can have a national dialogue on race, gender, and class, until we can understand the history of the doctrine of discovery and what it's done to our foundations and how it's dictated the way we treat one another and the world, we're not going to be able to solve these problems. We might stomp out a symptom here or there, but it's not going to get rid of it. It's not going to fix it. And so while I appreciate people who are raising awareness and talking about these things, I think the fight is much bigger than just this issue, right? It's a deeper, more deeply systemic problem. I mean, Joe Biden, he is he has said that he would again put a hold on execution. That's one of the reasons I think President Trump is executing people as quickly as he can. Not only because he knows Joe Biden will not execute these people, but he's actually campaigning through his white evangelical base. And he wants to at least go out as the hero, again, by fulfilling their heretical biblical mandate of becoming the Old Testament nation of Israel once again, and an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And we even saw this, right? Even if you read the articles of the quote by the family of that was killed by Brandon Bernard. And again, I do not condone what happened. It was a horrible, torturous death that they survived, that they were killed in, that they experienced. But I was struck when the family of the victims spoke after the execution, and they first thanked Trump for giving them some closure, and then they said they forgave Brandon Bernard. And I don't know how that's possible, even not only physically, but theologically. Because when you forgive someone, you do not extract judgment from them. You give mercy. At least not ultimate judgment. And so to thank President Trump for killing him, and then to say we forgive him, doesn't even theologically make sense to me. And so again, I think this is some of the problem. So yes, this is some of the problem that we're having. And so I think President Trump is campaigning to his white evangelical base right now, and at least trying to gain their support perhaps for another run in 2024. But again, President Trump is a symptom. He's not the root of this. The root is our genocidal history. The root is the horrible atrocities that we've committed as a nation, and that we've never acknowledged, changed our behavior, or tried to make right in any way whatsoever. And so this is where I think if we really want to change this pattern, we don't just have to, again, just change this law. We have to change our foundations. We have to create this common memory. We have to teach our true history. We have to have a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. And so I fear that it's just another place where we're missing the mark. We have deep, deep systemic problems. And protesting the symptoms isn't going to fix the problem. Just like taking a cough suppressant isn't going to cure your fever or your virus. It will stop you from coughing. It's not going to heal you. And so I want us to focus on the deeper systemic issues that we need to address. And I want us to work hard to try and change those. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been pondering today. I know these are kind of solemn thoughts, and I don't want to diminish the work that anybody is doing to try to get some of these convictions overturned, or some of these executions at least postponed or pardoned. And they're not even just, right? And if you look at Alfred Bourgeois, who was killed, he was executed last night, and again, his crime was heinous, and he definitely deserved to be punished. But he was on death row, and he was only given 21 days of notification that he was going to be executed, because the Justice Department switched the protocol from a 90-day notification to 21 days. And so his lawyers were arguing they didn't even have enough time, especially during the pandemic, to appeal and to try to fight to save his life. And so what we're doing is deeply unjust. It's deeply, it's wrong. It puts us in a company which actually we probably deserve to be in. Again, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. That's probably the nations we should be comparing ourselves to more frequently, due to our history as well as our current reality. But yeah, we're not going to fix these problems just by addressing the symptoms. We need to address the root. And so I want to, and this is the work that I'm trying to do. This is the work I'm looking to do moving forward. Is I want to address our nation's unjust, racist, sexist, and white supremacist foundations. I want to deal with our history. And I want to encourage everyone who's working alongside of not only our campaign that we ended in 2020, but the work we're going to be doing moving forward to continue to try to bring these issues to the forefront. And I'm going to continue to point out how so many of the social ills that we're dealing with today are rooted in our unjust foundations and our unacknowledged history. So those are just a few thoughts for today, my relatives. I hope that you are well today. The death rate from the COVID vaccine, the COVID-19, is astronomical. Again, the second day this week, over 3,000 deaths in a single day, and well over 200,000 new infections every day. I encourage people, even though a vaccine has been approved and may be rolled out again in the next few days, they're even saying Monday or Tuesday, they could begin distributing to healthcare workers and possibly some of the elderly within the next few days, beginning Monday or Tuesday next week. That does not mean the fight is over. That does not mean that this is done. It will be probably till late spring or even the summer until vaccine rolls out to the majority of the population. And again, this is only in the United States. If you've been hearing reports, there are reports coming out of the WHO and UN that many of the poorest countries around the world are not going to get vaccines for a long time. And while nations are literally stockpiling doses of the vaccine, enough to vaccinate our nations 3, 4, 5 times over, many poor countries have no access to these vaccines or have very limited access to them. And so this will continue to be a global problem. And as you also heard, there was, even when they did approve the vaccination, the recommendation by the committee was split. It wasn't a unanimous vote because they were split on whether they should recommend the vaccine for 18 and older or 16 and older. And there was not agreement on that. And so it was not a unanimous vote. And I have not heard exactly if the FDA decided to approve it for 18 and over or 16 and over, but I know there was disagreement among the panel that was making the recommendation for the FDA. And so, yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to continue to social distance, continue to wear your mask, continue to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe, as well as your families and the most vulnerable in your community. It's good there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we cannot let our guard down now. So I hope that your rest of the day is good, my relatives. I'm continuing to try and do these second cups of coffee on a fairly regular basis. We'll continue them next week. And walk in beauty. And then we learn how to walk in beauty together. Keep going now.